So, David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. How are you?
I'm well. So good to be with you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, let's jump straight in. Christian Educators Association International, or CEAI, um, protect Christian educators by providing liability insurance for lawsuits and job action
Mhm.
protection. So, I guess a good place to start here would be maybe you could explain why Christian educators need that.
Oh, absolutely, Michael. We are living in maybe what would be the most hostile environment in public schools for people of faith. It doesn't always have to be that way. And of course, we want our teachers to be blessings to their campuses and go with love, to win a friend, not to win an argument. But nonetheless, there are times when teachers need protection. For example, I just heard this morning in a meeting of a teacher that we have, and one of our members, who during a Zoom class had a student who had gone on their Facebook page, came to understand their political leanings, and just started berating them for being a racist, being a what have you, all these kind of things, which to my knowledge are completely untrue, but nonetheless, just the little climate we live in. And the teacher kept trying to, calm the student down and have the class, but eventually the teacher had to end the class because the
Mm,
student wouldn't stop screaming. And so that's the kind of thing a lot of our teachers are facing on a I don't want to say a regular basis, but we're hearing reports of those kind of things on a regular basis from around the country. And so, but another thing this shows is that there's so much more need for Christians in our public schools, right? Because so many students, the brokenness they experience, the emptiness, but also the misinformation and the misunderstanding about certain things. They need different perspectives, and so we are big proponents of sending Christians in the public schools to say, hey, let's lead with love. And there's another way to understand our world. In fact, what drew me into the public schools was just this idea that when I was a kid, I didn't have a lot of people in my life to explain to me how things worked, and just to have someone there from a biblical worldview to kind of explain to kids how life works is just so critical. But yeah, we do protect teachers in these situations, and not just those situations. We also protect teachers in any situation, even if it has nothing to do with their faith. Of course, a lot of what we do is, okay, this, I said this in class, or I was accused of this regarding my faith. But even teachers are dealing with all kinds of things like, hey, I had a student who was trying to hit another kid in my class, and I grabbed him and I left a bruise on his arm or whatever because I had to restrain him. Well, now, okay, there's a bruise and parents coming after me. So teachers are seeing all kinds of things, and they often don't want to turn to their unions because teachers' unions are very political, and they tend to only support one side, and they have different worldview questions involved there. So a lot of those teachers are saying, hey, I want support from the biblical worldview. I don't want to give my money to the teachers' unions. What else is out there? And that's where we fill in that gap.
wow. Uh, Sounds like a hard job being a teacher, that is. So,
It can be very hard. I don't want it to sound that hard because for 15 years I taught, and I had a great experience as a public school teacher. Just tremendous amount of favor, great relationships with kids. And so there's a lot of great stories out there, but nonetheless, what we hate to see is one of those great stories interrupted by an anomaly, and have a great teacher who loves the Lord and loves kids driven out of the classroom because of something that shouldn't have ever have happened, and where they weren't protected. So
right. Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is you get that one you touched, and they reach out years later. That makes it all worth it. It's
yes.
definitely it's a great profession. And you said you were in it for 15 years, and now you're involved in the CEAI. So
Mhm.
maybe the next question for you would be, we've covered some of the logistics of the problem, but
Mhm.
what would you say is one of the biggest or most worrisome problems in public
Yeah.
schools today? I mean, just in general.
Yeah. Two of the things we're seeing sort of on a macro level. Let me preface it by saying I don't think these are the biggest problems, but the two things that are getting a lot of the press right now are the sex ed issue and the transgender issue. So we've got, on one hand, many states trying to adopt a fairly radical sex ed curriculum called comprehensive sexuality education that really, in my opinion, amounts to grooming of students to be sexually abused, because it just so familiarizes them with creepy things that are just inappropriate for kids to even know about in many cases, much less be encouraged to experiment with. And so we're trying to help our teachers, our members, and others push back against those things. Also, the transgender issue, where you've got our culture kind of sowing gender confusion in the hearts and minds of students, and we've got coaches and teachers being, you've got to allow, biological students or people who are biologically one way, to allow them to undress and shower and those kind of things in situations where they're with students of another biological gender. And so we've just got lots of issues like that we're helping our members deal with on a national level that are facing our schools. But honestly, when I think about the biggest issue, I think really it's about the disconnection and the distraction and the brokenness that individual students are facing. When I was an educator, I just found that the brokenness in families, the just the pain students are dealing with, the suicide rates, the mental health issues. Of course, COVID is exacerbating that. That to me is the number one issue. These other things get a lot of press coverage and they're important, but for me, the what's going on in the heart of those individual students out there that may never be, they may never have an adult in their life who cares enough to really seek them out and say, hey, what's going on, and tell me what's happening in your life, and I care about you. And those individual relationships are just so huge. And when I was a teacher, I just found that God used me in a very powerful way in the lives of students. Even in a public school, I know that people don't sometimes have a category for that because it's hard to live out your faith in public school. But when you get one-on-one with a student and you hear their heart and you respond, there's a lot of opportunities for God to do things. And so we try to encourage our members to take advantage of those opportunities within the confines of the law, but to realize they're there for a purpose, and God has them there for a reason.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you can touch people's lives. I think COVID has brought a giant magnifying glass on a lot of those issues. I was, already aware of a lot of children that are from lower socioeconomic families. Probably the only time they really got quality food was at school. But, it just didn't even dawn on me some of the other abuses that are only identified if they're in school. And if they're not, then we have all these issues with suicide and abuse. It's horrible.
Absolutely. Yeah. To see that with COVID, so many kids, and of course, obviously for most of our students, we hope their home is a wonderful place for them to be. And that's the idea. Big believer, of course, in the power of family and parents. But the fact of the matter is, as you pointed out, a lot of kids' home is a very scary place for them to be. And school was their safe place. So to have that taken from them with COVID in terms of online schooling has been very detrimental for some kids out there, and that breaks our hearts.
Yeah, right. So it does. I mean, it's I don't want to say horrifying, but yeah, it's kind of horrifying. It's sad. I'm glad there are people that focus their lives on educating and on helping people and be able to touch their lives, especially from a Christian worldview, as much as they can. That's awesome. Yeah, maybe the next question I have for you is, we've covered some of these issues and the ramifications that educators face, and just the many, many issues. I would have to think that some of those educators might feel a little beat down and isolated. I mean, tell me if that's true. And then how does the CEAI help them with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Yeah, many of our educators do feel very isolated and alone. Teaching can be very lonely. You're in your classroom, you're with your kids, and that's great. Of course, the kids are there, so they're not, by definition, not alone per se. But nonetheless, in terms of that fellowship, that connection, that encouragement, it can feel very, very lonely. And so we come alongside our teachers in various ways. In fact, about 7 years ago, we started a ministry called Lift America. And the idea of Lift America is we gather, of course, COVID has impacted this. And we're doing some online things, but we try to gather teachers from across an entire community or city, Christian teachers, to come together in one place for an evening, have a meal together, worship together, get some encouragement, hear some testimonies, and really sort of change their mindset about what's possible as a public school educator. A lot of us as public school teachers who are Christians, we think, okay, I've got to keep my head down. I've got to kind of fly below the radar. I can't really be who I really want to be because I have to protect my job. And they come to this evening and they hear testimonies of teachers who aren't necessarily going by that philosophy. They're saying, no, there are ways I can live out my faith. There are ways I can, go pray for my colleagues. I can have a teacher prayer group. I can advise a Bible club. I can teach a good news club. There's a whole bunch of things I can do. And when you hear teachers give those testimonies and they realize, oh my goodness, now it's normal for me to go out and do those things. We're trying to change culture and what people perceive as the norm, right?
Mhm.
Now it's normal for a Christian teacher to let their light shine on campus in various ways. And here are some legal ways to do that. And we give them a little legal training, give them a encouraging message, give them some materials, and they walk back to their schools, hopefully changed. We're seeing lots of evidence of that, and with a new lens with which they kind of look at their schools and look at their ministry God's called them to on campus. Because we believe, every Christian teacher in a public school is called to be there, and it's maybe you might even say it's the most strategic mission field in our nation. So to have those teachers released now into those schools, not with the attitude of, oh, look at all these things coming against me, with this attitude of, I am being released into these circumstances to bring God's kingdom rule and reign in a way that maybe they didn't think they could before. And so we're very excited about that. We also provide, of course, a lot of resources on our website at ceai.org. We've got a whole page there on the transgender issue, ceai.org/gender. We've got a whole page there on unions. We've got a whole bunch of resources in our resource center. We got encouraging videos for them to watch to get kind of reconnected to their calling and what God has for them. So yeah, a lot of things we're doing. We're working on a new ministry initiative called Awake, which is ambassadors working as kingdom educators, because we are ambassadors. God calls us that, ambassadors for Christ, and He makes His appeal through us. And so we're excited about some of the things God is doing. And if teachers out there want to get encouraged and not feel so alone, certainly check us out at ceai.org.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, you gotta have that back support to be able to keep going. And it's wonderful that Christians work together that way. I'm very impressed with the organization. I guess we're coming close to the end. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave both parents and educators?
Yeah, I'd like to remind our audience here of just the power of prayer. That when we think something is insurmountable, and when we look at our public schools, we look at the problems and look at the curriculum and the things we hear in the news, it can be so easy just to say, throw up our hands and say, what can you do? And of course, we're seeing people do homeschooling and private schooling, and those are wonderful things. But I'm not ready to give up on our public schools, and I think that we can pray and see God move, and encourage teachers. And when I was a teacher, I would have parents of faith who, when they discovered that I was also a person of faith, the weight of burden you would see lift off their shoulders, and the relief that they would experience, because they had gotten from their English teacher, from their whatever, so, biology teacher, all these other perspectives, and they come into my class and they hear something different, and they have different kinds of conversations, and it just so encouraged them. And I just think all the families out there that can't afford private school, that for whatever reason cannot homeschool, and they're putting their kids in public school. And so let's pray, let's lift them up, let's encourage Christians to see public school teaching as a ministry, as a calling, as a mission field, and send them into the public schools and raise. When I was called into this ministry out of the classroom to come on staff and then lead Christian Educators Association International, the Lord asked me a question, or he told me something I felt in my spirit. I can't, it's not in the Bible, but as strong as I could sense it was the Lord, I did. He said, Dave, my army is already in the schools. Your job is to wake them up. And I'm just convinced that there's these many, many Christians in our public schools. George Barna says that half of all public school teachers go to church at least once a month. When I heard that, I was blown away. See, that's the sleeping army. And if we can pray, if we can encourage, if we can bless them and help them kind of wake up to what God has for them, and help them get free of fear and isolation, that is huge. So I'm just encouraging those out there to pray for your teachers in your local public school, and pray for the church to grab a hold of the public schools as that mission field. So thank you, Michael.
Amen to that. I think everybody needs to pray, especially for our children and education, and for the educators.
Mhm.
So, David, thank you again for the work you do and your organization does. And thanks for taking the time to share a little bit with it today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Michael. Thank you for having me.